Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 169 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. I first met today's guest and I saw him speak at the Cultivate conference near Macclesfield earlier this year. He's one of these people that both the story and the way he presents it, you cannot help but being captivated by him. And I really hope that you will see that today. Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones, MBE, aka the Black Farmer, is my guest today. He farms in the southwest of England near the Devon-Cornwall border, and he founded the Black Farmer brand, through which he markets a wide range of food and drink, and indeed non-food and drink products as well, which are available online and some through the major supermarkets. Wilfred was born in Jamaica and came over to the UK with his family at an early age, growing up in inner city Birmingham. Jumping ahead to his working life, he became a chef before talking his way into working into television. We'll hear that story today, rising to become a producer and director for the BBC. And he's credited with bringing many of the top celebrity chefs to the small screen, including Gordon Ramsay, Anthony Worrell-Thompson, and James Martin. In 1994, he founded a food and drink marketing agency in London, which went on to run successful marketing campaigns for Lloyd Grossman sauces, Kettle Crisps, Plymouth Gin, and many more challenger brands. He bought his 26-acre farm in West Devon in 2000, and the Black Farmer brand soon followed. He has an immense passion for improving inclusion and diversity in farming and paving the path for greater opportunities for younger people coming into agriculture. His New Faces for Farming initiative, launched in partnership with Writtle University College earlier this year, is all about encouraging more diversity into farming. And indeed, his brand tagline, "Without Frontiers," encapsulates his drive to ensure more people have the chance to live and work in rural areas. Wilfred was awarded an MBE for services to farming in the 2020 New Year's Honours List. He's a governor of the Royal Agricultural University in Cirencester. Back in 2012, he was awarded an honorary doctorate in marketing by Plymouth University. And in 2021, he was awarded an honorary degree for distinction in the farming industry from Writtle University College in Essex. It is an absolute privilege and honour to have him on the podcast. And Wilfred, I don't think I've actually had either as long an introduction as that for anyone, but also as distinguished an introduction as well. Welcome to Meet the Farmers, and let us know how your week's been.
Well, I tell you what, thank you very much for such a fantastic introduction. I'm sitting here thinking that guy sounds really interesting. God,
Who's that then?
Who's that then? I like to sort of hear your story. So, I'm sure that flattery is designed to sort of soften everybody up before they go into the sort of the nitty-gritty of the conversation. But
I can tell. Well, we can all tell you've been a man who's worked in television.
But I mean, as I was saying before we started to record this, that I'm here suffering from COVID. In a sense, it's the first time I've got COVID, and I'm one of those on the vulnerable list. I've had 5 of the boosters because I had acute myeloid leukemia about 8 years ago, and that's a pretty brutal illness to have, and therefore I have a compromised immune system. So I was always quite nervous about getting COVID. But if this was television, people could see that I'm still sitting upright and I'm still being able to sort of function. So thank God for the vaccine, because it's been tough, but it would have been pretty awful without it. But I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you. So I just thought, right, Wilfred, get out of your quick bed and do your job and have a chat to Ben. So that's fine,
honestly, thank you so much for coming on. I know lots of the listeners will know exactly what COVID is like when you get it, and certainly, so it's massively appreciated you being here. Let's start at the beginning, which is of course a very good place to start. Tell us about your very early life in Jamaica and when and why your family moved to the UK.
Yeah, you did give a very good introduction, but just to put a bit more flesh on the bone, as it were, I was born in a place called Frankfield, Clarendon. And what is really interesting about that is this. It's a very rural part of Jamaica.
Okay.
And if you go there today, you'd see farmers working the land. And in fact, what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of people who came to this country during the 50s, because I am of the Windrush generation,
Yep.
came from rural backgrounds, came from farming backgrounds, and that when they had the opportunity to come to the UK, they went to where the work was. That happened to be in the towns and cities. But I've always felt that farming has always been part of my DNA, as it were, as it is for a lot of people from immigrant backgrounds, but they really didn't have the opportunity to go into farming. And in my case, we as a family were brought up in a place called Small Heath in Birmingham.
Yep.
And my mum and dad came over first. And what was traditional in those days is that then my sister and I then joined them several years later. So the first time I saw my mum and dad was when I was about 4 years old. And we lived in a place called Small Heath. And Small Heath is one of those classic inner city areas which is devoid of hope, opportunity. It's the pits. And even today, it's been somewhat 50 years since I left the place, and it still sends shivers down my spine just remembering what a horrible environment it was to be brought up in that sort of in that area.
Yeah, and you were one of 9.
Yeah, so I've got 8 brothers and sisters, and 11 of us living in a 2-up-2-down terrace house.
Yeah,
wow, really cramped. 3 to a bed, outside toilets. We were very poor. My mother had to try and feed all 11 of us with one chicken, and this is one of these sort of old boiler chickens that took weeks to tenderize.
Wow.
And when I look back at that time in my life, it was a pretty miserable time. There's nothing romantic about it at all. And as a way of supplementing the family income, my father had an allotment. And in a sense, the allotment really became my oasis away from the misery of being brought up in that sort of environment. And so those of us who are lucky to live in rural Britain, we need to thank God that we are not brought up in some of the environments that some city dwellers find themselves in.
Yeah.
Because I can remember as an 11-year-old boy, I loved this sense of space that I felt when I was on my father's allotment. And I had some sort of purpose in terms of having to look after the vegetables, watering, nurturing, actually watching something grow, seeing the fruits of your labor.
Yep.
And for me, it was a really important time. Everything that I subsequently did with my life was to try and get into a position to buy a farm. Now, one of the things that I'm really doing a lot of campaigning about is that if you are from a immigrant background, the chances of you owning land, unless you're very, very rich, are impossible. Because most farmers have their land handed down through the generations.
Exactly.
Or they're lucky enough to have, earned a lot of money. And so what it then means is that if you're from my background, the chances of getting to farming are impossible. But there is a way that it could be achieved, because as well as land by being owned privately, there are a lot of institutions that own a lot of land, be that the National Trust, be that the Church of England.
Church of England, yeah.
Universities, tons and tons of different institutions, English Heritage own land. And then what they do, these institutions, is they have their land agents, and these land agents then rent it out to traditional farming backgrounds. And so our industry is not getting any diversity because it's impossible for diversity to come in because they don't have access to land. And one of the things I'm saying is that if we truly want to make rural Britain a lot more diverse, I'd be calling on these institutions to be saying to their land agents, look, let's set aside, 1, 2, 3% of the land that we own that is specifically designed for new entrants into farming, and people from non-traditional farming backgrounds, so they can have access to land. And until that happens, we're never going to bring any change, and we're never going to innovate, because it's outsiders that innovate. It's outsiders that see opportunities. And the criticism about our industry is that it's slow, that there's a lot more that we could be doing if we had different ideas. Yeah. And it's something I think we could all be doing a lot more to try and achieve.
Let's put the pause button on your story for a minute, because I just want to delve a little bit more into this. When you have sort of those conversations with either land agents, all those big institutions, as you say, what kind of response are you getting personally?
Well, what's happened in I call it the food and farming industry. The food and farming industry has really got away with murder because change comes about by the demands of urban Britain. And urban Britain decides that something becomes a political issue. You then see change. Now, because farming has been seen as an industry, as for thickos or stupid people, I think there's this conflict between urban and rural Britain that we've managed to be under the radar, that a lot of people in urban Britain really have not twigged that the power is with land. Mm-hmm. And the two most vitally important things in our lives are sleep and food. And I think that there is now a change happening where actually urban Britain are now starting to ask these sort of questions and demand more from these institutions, that they should be doing things to help to bring about change. Because when I've had conversations with these institutions, they're not really interesting. They're not going to change unless somebody forces them to change. Every change we've had within our food chain, whether that's free range, whether that's battery hens, that's down to the consumer saying this is no longer acceptable. And I say, look, the foods that we import into this country that's consumed by immigrant families could be actually grown in this country if the expertise was there. So it'd be great for the economy. It's about actually us realizing, or these institutions, the government realizing, we need to do more to make this into a place of better opportunity. And if you take me, for example, I'm sort of held up as somebody that's sort of broken the mold. But in the greater scheme of things, I've only got 28 acres. That ain't, most farmers would, think that's nothing. It's just a piss in the ocean. And, you're talking about people who have thousands of acres. That's where you could then start to do something that's sort of commercially viable. Yeah. I've managed to create and because I'm a branding man, I've demonstrated what you could do with almost very little.
Exactly.
And I, one of the things I would love to see happening a lot more is that actually farmers have a much bigger relationship with their consumers, because what's happened in the past is that the supermarkets have been the gatekeepers to the relationship with the consumer. And so the consumer doesn't really have an understanding of what farming is all about. And what I've demonstrated with my brand, that if you're prepared to go out and communicate that the consumers are begging for some sort of relationship with the people who are actually producing their foods. And I would like to see a lot of farmers realize that is the future. That it's not just about doing the job, but it's reaching out, communicating with the very people who are buying your food, because they are your sales force. If you get them on side, they will be supportive. They will then help make the change.
Absolutely. And you and your journey is testimony to that. But it's like, I think we're becoming better at talking about it and saying it, but it's very different saying it and actually getting out and doing it, isn't it? And having those conversations and getting out and actually building your own brand.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, we have to be honest about the industry. The industry is in desperate need for change.
Yeah.
And that we've got away with it because actually we have not had enough people challenging what farming is all about. Now, if somebody made me an agricultural minister, the first thing that I would demand is that all the farmers' names should be on food products, or it should be, just so we start to get the urban Britain actually linking the food that they eat from real people who are producing that. For me, we're putting a lot more emphasis in actually the farmers being front of face to the consumer. So there's some way of sort of engaging it. Absolutely important. I would demand that every single child goes and visits school once a year. It's part of the sort of the curriculum.
Yep.
What I think is that if anything has the big lessons that we are now being taught is that this reliance on globalization has now come and kicked us in the teeth. And then actually what we need to do is that we need to look after our own resources and to get a lot more people making it so that we could be self-sufficient, that rather than what we've done in the past is thinking that because we could get it cheaply done in these countries like Russia and Ukraine, look where we are now. And that needs to be a life lesson that actually we need to spend a lot more time, effort and resources in being self-reliant, being really connecting with urban Britain. I would say, for example, one of the crises that we have at the moment about getting people to go and work on farms and to help with harvesting. One of the things like if a student goes to Australia, for example, if they go and work on a farm for 3 months or 6 months, they could then get an extended visa to stay longer. We should be having schemes like that in this country. We should be saying to students, right, if you go and spend 6 months and working on a farm and doing that, that will, some money off your student loan will come off. We need to be a lot more imaginative to invite new blood rather than what we've done in the past is relying on cheap labor, people doing it because they have no alternative. So if we start doing that, I think A, we're going to attract new blood. B, we're going to get people seeing that farming is an essential part of life, and we're going to be celebrated, just like the cult of the celebrity chefs. It was the celebrity chefs that made catering an honorable profession for young people to go into. They just thought, oh, I could do that. We need to do exactly the same thing with farming. Rather than thinking it's these old, bloody, frosty white men, it's got to be somewhere that's glamorous, that's interesting, that's going to attract new blood.
Yeah.
And that is when we're going to see a much better balance between urban and rural in this country.
My brain is working overtime in terms of where I want to take this conversation, but let's go back to your story first. I want to return to some of those questions later on, but take us back to so very early career for you. You became a chef. Tell me briefly about that time and then how that led on to next stages.
Well, my life. I don't want my life to seem romantic because it wasn't. My life was shit to start off with. Because I was brought up in Straw Heath in Birmingham. I went to the local secondary modern school, they were called then, and it's for people who failed their 11 plus. I am dyslexic, and then so I spent most of my time at school not understanding what the hell was going on. I could hardly read and write. And school for me was a miserable, horrible place. And one of my other passions is dyslexia, because dyslexia is a gift.
Yep.
And it's only now as I've got older that I recognize that it's a gift. But, it was pretty miserable living with dyslexia when I was younger. And even today, a lot of young people have a pretty miserable time because there still isn't any understanding of dyslexia and the gift that dyslexia is. And especially a lot of people, again, in the farming community, they tend to be sort of written off. And so I left school at the age of 16, and I wanted to get away from home, because 3 to a bed ain't that bloody comfortable. So I joined the army, and again, not because I had any desires to be a military man. It's just that I was.
It got you out.
Yeah. I was as thick as shit. I couldn't. What else could you do? Chuck him in the army. But in those days, if you're a black guy with a mouthy attitude, one or two things were going to happen. You were either going to shut the fuck up and do as you're told, or you're going to get your head kicked in and get chucked out. So I got my head kicked in and chucked out. So, at the age of 18, everything you would probably expect to happen to a black kid from my background, I seemed to be on course to ending up in prison, ending up on society's dustbin heap. And what was really interesting in those days, if you're a failure at everything, and they think, oh, what the hell could we do with them? They put you into catering because they thought, well, shit, he could peel potatoes and wash up dishes. So that's how I ended up in catering, not again because of the desires, because, well, what the hell can he do?
Okay.
That's how I ended up. And I went to the local catering college, and luckily I took to it. I took to catering. But one of the things I say to young people is this: the most important. Well, you don't have to be young. It's something I think you need to have in your whole life, is that you need to find out what is your personal purpose.
Mm-hmm.
If you do not know what your personal purpose is, your life is that of surviving.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing more miserable of an existence than a life of surviving. So in all of the time that I was living my life and doing all these different things, the one purpose that always kept me driving and motivating forward was to one day own my own farm.
Yep.
It kept me absolutely focused. And I absolutely fundamentally believe that you need to have in the back of mind your personal purpose, and everything you do needs to be actually aimed towards fulfilling that personal purpose. So I when I interview people for jobs, and I've just done a series rounds of interviews at the moment, the question that always flummoxes them is when I say, what is your personal purpose? Because most people don't know. I said, I'm not really interested in employing somebody because for a job, they need to be thinking, well, this job is here to help me fulfill my personal purpose. And that's more than just putting bread on the table. It's got to be something deeper than that.
Absolutely. And it's something, like you say, most of us are pretty terrible, actually, even spending any time, even thinking about that, let alone knowing what it is.
Yeah, it's really, really important because, in order to give your life worth and value, it doesn't really matter what it is, but you need to know why you're doing it. Otherwise, there's nothing more traumatic than survival mode, really.
Yeah.
And again, so my story is someone from society's dustbin heap who has managed to fulfill his purpose, because all you've got to do is have the stamina to keep going and to keep believing. We live in an age where people want instant success. It ain't. Life's a marathon, and it just keep going. And also, I don't know if you're going to go on to this, because, in order to buy this farm, even though I qualified as a chef, and I'm not one of these big glamorous chefs. I mean, I was flipping burgers, so it's the bottom end of it. And I did that for a number of years, but I knew that if I was ever going to buy my own farm, I was never going to do that flipping burgers. I would need to do something bold.
Exactly. So with that in mind, how and when did you end up, and I love this part of the story, but how and when did you end up in front of the BBC, and how did you get in and then eventually take on that part of your career?
Well, the starting point, again, is mindset. A lot of people think that success is down to qualifications and experience, but it ain't. It's down to attitude and mindset.
Yep.
If you got the right attitude and mindset, you can achieve anything. And you've also got to have the courage to be bold. Now, one of the gifts of being poor and being in society's dustbin heap is, well, there's no further to fall.
Yeah.
And that there's only one way to go, and that's up. And that also to have the audacity to dream and dream big. One of the things I like to talk to people about is that if you go into a classroom of 4-year-olds, for example, and you say, right, who's the best at, let's say, football? They'll all put their hands up.
Yeah.
They've still got the personality and the character to be bold, to be audacious. By the time they're about 7, and you go into the same classroom and you say, who's the best football player? They'll all point to a person. They'll say, They've all been conditioned by society of actually lowering their expectations about fitting in, about sort of conforming. So the boldness, the courage that you need to achieve your dreams tends to be conditioned out of people when they're very, very young. And if you want to be able to achieve anything, is like, how do you go back and grasp that boldness and courage? And the reason why people lose boldness and courage is because they care about what other people think. They care that if they say, actually, it's a bit like when I was saying to people, I'm going to buy a farm. All of my family and friends look at me as though I was nuts, because it was so outside of their orbit of understanding that this guy is just off his rocker. Or I can remember there was this fantastic series on at the BBC making documentary programs. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to go and work at the BBC as a producer director.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, this guy is nuts. He could hardly read and write. BBC is full of Oxbridge types. This is mad. And so what would happen is that most people then wouldn't even think and be that, because they're frightened of what people's reactions would be. So The first thing is that you got to be bold and just say it. And then the other thing is no good just saying it. It's then you've got to then start to do the hard work and graft to make it happen. But in my case, what I did is that, and this is just standard stuff. Yeah. I wrote to, when I said, I went to the Radio Times, as it was called then, and I went to every single name that said producer, and I wrote to every single one of them. And you're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and not one of them got back to me. Okay. Now, most people would have given up then. I tried ringing them. Not one person would take my call. A lot of people would give up then. And then one of the things about being dyslexic is about how do you think outside of the box? How do you think of another way that's going to break convention? And so these are the sort of stuff that I did. So at the time, there was a big studio at Birmingham called BBC Peppermill. And again, this is about thinking outside the box, being absolutely driven and being audacious and also putting yourself at risk, making yourself vulnerable. And I can remember the security guards whose job it was to let people in and out of the buildings. They had this shed that they, would keep warm in with their electric fires. And they hated having to go in and out of these sheds. And I went and chatted them up and being friendly. And I said I would open the gates for them. And so they said, okay, fine. And so I did that for months, not getting any paid and nothing else to do. And then, saying good afternoon and madame to all of the people coming in and out. Yeah. From that, I then made friends with the cleaners who were going in to clean the offices. And I said, look, could I come and help you clean the offices? And they said, yeah. And again, for nothing. It's about all investing in the opportunity. Yeah. A lot of people won't do things unless, they have guarantees, they have certainty. And then with that, and the other thing I believe is this: you'll never, ever achieve your dreams and goals unless you have the courage to put it out there. And I can remember when I was cleaning the offices, I met a guy, and I remember his name to this day. His name is Jock Gallagher. And I could remember saying to him, look, I would really love to get a job working in television. And he said, come up to his office. And he spoke to me for about an hour, and he says, look, you're not the type of person we employ in television because, you don't have any qualifications, no qualifications at all. You got a bit of an attitude problem. And he said, but look, he said, this is something he said he might live to regret. But he says, look, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to give you a job as a runner, which means you do all the shit work that nobody wants to do, and then to see what happens. Now, that man having the courage to give me that break then started up a career in television. One of the things I hate is human resources, because human resources filter out people like me. And what I say is that the trick in life is to find your guardian angels. Find the people who will go out of their way to give you a break, to help you achieve everything that you want. And every single thing I've ever achieved, I could point to people who went out of their way to give me a break to start to achieve. Even the Black Farmer brand. It was a guy in Devon who a manufacturer who I went along with him with this idea, and he took a punt with me. Those are the people to find, the people prepared to take a punt to give you a break. For the opportunities that I have got out of life because of people doing that to me, it's one of the things I still do today. When I'm really keen to give people a break in life to help them in their sort of career.
Hi all, we'll go back to Wilfred in a bit, but I just need to spend some time talking to you about the podcast and its future. Don't worry, I'm not giving it up anytime soon, but after nearly 170 episodes released, plus bonus episodes, plus the time I'm spending on producing podcasts over at my new podcast, Raw Business Focus, and of course, working with my other wonderful podcast clients, other work and other things in my life, I'm really having to have a long think about the sustainability of Meet the Farmers in the long run, because ultimately that's what it's about. This is what I want. I really want to continue telling these stories, but I really need to think about the time. They do take up a lot of time in research, recording and editing, which I know you all appreciate. I know you do, and many of you reach out and tell me that, and I massively appreciate that. I massively appreciate you listening to the show and all that feedback I get. However, if the podcast is going to be sustainable in the long run, I am going to have to both value that time and invest in the future of the show as well. So with this in mind, as of today, I'm going to do what a lot of other podcasts do, and I am looking for sponsors for the show. If you or your business is interested in sponsoring an episode or several episodes, please do get in touch. I will be contacting many businesses myself over the coming weeks with a sponsorship pack. And I'm also launching a Patreon page for the podcast and the Meet the Farmer Supporters Club on that page. If you feel like you get value from the show in any way and want to support its future, I would massively appreciate that. Please head to patreon.com/Meet the Farmers. And there are various support levels to choose on there. In return, depending on how much you pledge, I'm offering some bonus content as well. So I'd really appreciate that. Head to patreon.com/Meet the Farmers to support the show. And together, we can not only continue to bring fantastic independent farming voices onto the show, because that's what it's all about, also talk about the gritty issues connected to food farming in the countryside, but also work to grow the podcast over time and do more on-site farm recordings as well. So that's about it for me. Thank you very much in advance for your support. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it in advance. That's it for now, though. So let's go back to Wilfred.
So that's how I got into the BBC. And then so I started off as a runner and then went on to be a researcher, then went on to be a producer director.
Literally climbed the ladder.
And at the time, the program that I used to work on was a program that was responsible for creating the cult of the celebrity chefs. And my boss at the time knew that the Oxbridge types were really intimidated by these chefs because they were real hard bastards. Yeah. They would take you outside to, sort out a problem. And my boss knew that I was the sort of person that would oblige, basically, because I wasn't intimidated from them. Because if you're from the streets, a bit of swearing, cussing is sort of, is normal. And then many times I would say, I'm fucking in charge. You shut the fuck up. I'm Gordon Ramsay. I mean, seriously, I can remember Gordon Ramsay coming to my house to cook Sunday dinner so we could teach him how to perform in front of the camera. Because in those days, we used to shoot on film. And film was very, very expensive. It's like £100 a roll. And therefore, you can't have people not knowing what they're doing. So they needed direction. They needed a lot of control. And that's what I was good at.
Oh, wow. That's where it came in.
Yeah. And so nowadays, because everything is shot on film, you don't need to have that skill because things can be put together in the cutting room.
Yeah, so I'm going to move on to sort of the next stage, but I find it fascinating how this the sort of center of these sort of food stories going right the way back to your dad's allotment as well. They keep on sort of plotting their way through your life, driven by this massive ambition to have the farm. But in 1994, you founded your marketing agency, your food and drink marketing agency. You took on a number of high profile clients through that time. Why the leap into that? And when did that sort of click in your head that actually, you know what, I want to go down this line now?
We see what's really interesting about life is that you never know why it's only when you look back, you could then join up the dots. And sometimes in life, you have to have faith that what the experience that you're going through is essential to help you get to where you want to get to. And that's where faith is really, really important. And I'd been at the BBC for about 15 years and I traveled the world making films, I've been to most countries. And then the BBC was changing. And also, that's what it's really essential to have this dream. I just knew that actually, if you're ever going to buy this farm, you better get your act together because as glamorous as a profession working in television was, I was never going to earn any money to be able to buy even the little farm I've got. So I just knew you had to decide you're either going to stay at the BBC or go and set up your own business so you could be true to the promise that you made yourself. So I can remember leaving the BBC, just having enough money to pay my mortgage for 3 months, deciding that if I didn't take that leap now, I would live in regret. And again, one of the things I find quite fascinating about life is this. Most people have dreams. Most people have things they would love to do. And the one thing that stops them doing that is fear. Fear and uncertainty. And uncertainty holds people prisoners. And and because people believe that there is such a thing as certainty, the only thing that is certain in life, the only thing that's certain in life is that life is uncertain. And so that's the first thing people need to grasp. And a lot of people, they don't do things because they need to be able to see what the outcome is going to be before they even start. And that's just an impossible task and an impossible ask. They're desperate for certainty. So I say, look, the thing and the skill in life is this. Rather than look for certainty, say, right, I'm going to do this, and I do not know what the outcome is going to be, but I'm going to put my arm around uncertainty and walk forward and keep walking forwards, and things will come my way that I have no answers for, and I do not know what the answers are for, but I have enough confidence in self that somehow I will find a way. That's all you need to say. Don't go there expecting to be able to tick the boxes and say, I don't know. And you know you're going to be facing problems, but it's confidence that you'll find a way to deal with the problems when the problems come along. That's really, really important. Otherwise, you'll always be trapped in this fear of, well, I'd like to, but what about this? But what about that? You know, when I left the BBC with just enough money to pay the mortgage for 3 months, I knew I did not want to live my life in regret because I didn't have the courage to take that leap of faith. And again, you know, if you have the belief that by putting it out there and working hard and being focused, because one of the things I tend to talk about when I go and do my talks is that there are two things you need in life to achieve. You don't need qualifications. Your background doesn't really matter. Your sex, your color, your age doesn't matter. The two things that any successful person will have is that they are ruthlessly focused. And what I mean by being ruthlessly focused is that they're able to get rid of the white noise. Most people's lives are full of shite, things that are irrelevant. And actually, it's really tragic, but for most people, they only realize that when they're really ill and they're able to get rid of all the nonsense.
Yeah, because they have to. Yeah.
Have to, and they find out what's really, really important. And, you know, I had cancer about 8 years ago, and that was a blessing because, again, that's a reminder of actually focusing down on what really is important, you know. So I think the key thing is focus, but the second thing, which is more important than focus, is that you have to have passion. And the reason why passion is important is because passion defies reason, it defies logic, it doesn't make sense. And one of the things I find is that when people have worked in, let's say, a corporate environment, well-structured environment, and they go off and they do things on their own, they fail. They fail because they think the same rules that of a structured environment will apply when you're starting off would apply to start. It doesn't. Because, you know, the thing about passion, it helps you get over all the hurdles. It just helps you get over things that doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. And to try and give people a better understanding of what I mean by passion, look at somebody when they're in love. Yeah. They do fucking crazy things. They do things that do not make sense. You know, they're so driven, you know. So we all have it within us, but it tends to be just focused for, you know, love. But if you could take that passions into your own ambitions, your own desire, that's what it is, you know. Yeah. You know, we laugh at the madness of what some people do when they're in love with somebody. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's exactly the same sort of thing.
Do you see enough passion in farming, would you say?
No, there isn't. And one of the reasons why there isn't enough passion in farming is because actually farmers have had it pretty easily. I mean, I know that I'd probably get lynched by a lot, but if you are a woman living in a 15-floor, you know, tower block with 6 kids, you know, struggling, you know, there's no sympathy for those of us who have got countrysides. And, you know, for most people in urban Britain, we are the romantic dream, you know, of sort of life. It is tough being in you know, I could say that because I've been in both worlds.
Exactly.
So
you've seen both.
I would much rather the world that I've got now than, you know, even being poor as a farmer is better than being poor in an urban environment. It's brutal, you know. Yeah. One of the things I hated being in Small Heath is that you're constantly looking over your shoulder because somebody might stick a knife in you. You know, when you hear of all these horrible crimes and things like that, well, that's not usually in a rural setting. It is some sort of and savage urban sort of environment, really. And so, there's a lot that we need to be grateful for. I thought, well, I'd been in, obviously a chef. I'd made food programs. So it made sense to then run my own food and drink marketing agency. And then I launched brands like Lloyd Grossman sauces, Kettle Chips, Plymouth Gin, Cobra Beer, etc. And it's only when I then look back at that time, I then realized it was really essential that I went through that training.
Completely.
It wasn't something that I actually decided I was going to do. I did it because that when I then launched my brand, the Black Farmer brand, I then understood that you could have the best product in the world, but if you don't know how to do marketing, you will fail. And that was my training ground.
Which is the biggest lesson.
Yeah.
So let's bring this back to your farm. So why Devon? And tell us about the farm, the land, and the process of finding it.
Yeah, so I used to go down to Devon and Cornwall on holiday a lot. And when I was down one summer, and the weather was shite, and I thought,
this is the West Country.
Yeah, let me go around, having a look at some of the farms then. And it was at the time when a lot of farmers were getting out of farming. And I saw this particular place, which is just outside Launceston or Lanston. And it's an old dairy farm. So, when the farm, I don't think it was all borehole. There was no running water. I mean, the place was a bloody state, really.
Yeah.
And the land, really, it's only good for silage and for hay and for grazing, because it's clay and that sort of stuff. So I bought this not having a goddamn clue. And the biggest mistake that townies make is that they think that they are more clever than bloody farmers and the raw people, You soon find out bloody, soon that these little buggers are crafty little socks, basically. So, the first year or so, the sort of the urban edges had to be the urban edges of superiority had to be knocked out of me.
Mother Nature has a great capacity of teaching you lessons. Yeah.
Not only that, but the bloody farmers as well, and these rural guys who go around and then fucking ritz, they know how to stitch you good and proper. So you learn pretty quickly that there is a code and there's a language and there's an understanding that needs to be had just to understand, how the world works there. So, which is good. I don't think that I wouldn't want to change it, but I think a lot of urbanites go down to rural Britain and find it's very different to what they sort of imagine, really. And it's a good test as well. The test is you got to pass the test if you're serious about making it, your home, as it were. Because I've had this place now for 25 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when I bought it, again, as I said, it's only 30 acres. So, it's farmed by my next door neighbor because I haven't got a clue what to do. But I experimented in a couple of things. Like I've had sheep, I've had, traditional breeds like Red Devon, Ruby Reds on it. But it's my next door neighbor who does everything because I haven't got a bloody clue. So he's got a good deal off me because, he's the one that managed everything. But what I did see is that I saw an opportunity to how to create a brand that could bridge the gap between urban and rural. Because, it was at the time when there was a lot of hostility between urban and rural Britain. It was just about the time when, the fox hunting bill and all of that sort of the clash. It was as though, Britain was at war with itself. And I saw actually there's an opportunity to create a brand because there was a lot of hostility from urban Britain towards rural Britain, and also to be a vehicle for me to be a purpose-driven brand to help bring about change about how can we bring about more diversity into rural Britain. And I thought, well, what I don't want to do is to become a Levi Roots. So if you look at Levi Roots, Levi Roots is an ethnic brand. I think the moment people then think color, they think, oh, well, this is something for this particular group. One of the things you'll see about me and the brand, it's very, very English. I mean, You know, I'm a bloody white Englishman with painted black, really. I love Englishness. And I thought, right, I want to create a brand that is there to celebrate Britishness, to celebrate British farming, because again, being in the food industry, you know, a lot of the food that we have in this country, the welfare standards are not as good. I mean, it's pretty poor. So I said, this brand is going to become the premium brand of these products. And I thought, right, I will do something that's quintessentially British. And that's why we came up with a sausage. All right, I want to do a really good and premium sausage. And then I was thinking, I wanted to create a brand that was going to be noticed, because coming from a marketing background, I knew you could have the best products in the world, but if people don't know about it, you will fail.
Yeah.
And there's many marketing stories about, you know, great brands, great products, but bad marketing, and they failed. And most farmers suffer from that. They think that producing great products is all they need to do, and people will come. They won't. You got to go out and meet them. So I was thinking about, what the hell can I call this brand? And one day it came to me. All of my next door neighbors used to call me the Black Farmer.
Okay.
And I thought, shit, you know, that's a pretty good brand name. Not only is it a really good brand name, it has an edge to it.
Yeah, exactly.
In this age of political,
it's going to stick.
Well, people are a bit wary. People think, oh, you know, I've had people shit, you know. And let me tell you what I did. I thought, oh, you know, even though I was thinking, God, this is a bit risque, actually. Let me go and research it. And all the research came back and said, don't call it the Black Farmer, because it will
really? Okay.
Yeah, because it will offend people, you know, and it's very, very controversial. And so there's a big lesson in this. And the lesson is this: that research could tell you what people were thinking yesterday. Research could tell you what people are thinking today, but research cannot tell you what people are thinking tomorrow.
Okay.
That's why you have to have the convictions of your own idea, rather than make your decisions based on evidence and research. The moment you're making your decisions based on evidence and research, you're already behind the curve. And we live in an age where everybody does everything that's driven by data. But if you're going to change and you're going to innovate, you have to be courageous to be ahead of the curve. And also in rural Britain, they would refer to you as coloured rather than black.
Yeah.
And there's a confusion about using the word black, you know. And urban Britain thinks that when rural people call people coloured, they're being racist. They're not being bloody racist. It's just that, you know, people are nervous about trying to find out what is the right language to use without being accused of being racist and all that. So there is the reason I went for that brand name. It is a bit like, actually, it's right in your face. It's not to be caught up with that sort of that nervousness. And actually, it's going to be where people, well, you know, to get somebody to pick up something, you've got to get them to that take two moment. The reason we're having a conversation is because actually, you know, would we be having this conversation if I was the Caucasian farmer? You know,
yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? It's because it's
would the brand have done as well? Probably not.
It wouldn't have done it. It wouldn't have done well as that. And it's only because, you know, it's about. So I've had people saying, "Well, I couldn't get away with calling it the White Farmer." Well, it would have no meaning. I mean, if you're going to bring about change, you know, you're challenging conventions. You know, you're giving people a reason to sort of, you know, think and look sort of twice. That's why it works. You know, the brand's been going 18 years now, and it's made a big difference. And so for me, you know, when I look at my backstory to what I've achieved, you know, it's something that I'm really grateful for. And what I want to try and do is to try and help and encourage more diversity. And diversity is not necessarily color. I'm more into saying more people from non-traditional farming backgrounds into our industry, because I think we're in desperate need of that.
Yeah. I mean, part of this, and this is the perfect time really to talk about your New Faces for Farming initiative, which was launched earlier this year in association with Writtle University College in my home county of Essex. And part of this will include an all expenses paid residential weekend held at Writtle's campus here on next year. I think it's end of March, early April next year.
That's right. Yeah. So before I was ill, I used to run something called the Black Farmer Scholarship, and where people would come to my farm and I would personally mentor them for 5 or 6 weeks. And then if they were still interested in farming, they could then apply to any of the agricultural colleges to do the courses. I'm so keen on introducing new blood into farming, but because I can't physically do it now, that's why I tied up with agricultural college. And the whole idea behind that, again, is to get people from young people, 16 to 18-year-olds from non-traditional farming backgrounds to go and have a taste the weekend of what it's like to work and live in rural Britain. Because what we need to understand, those of us in rural Britain, is that a lot of people have no idea. The thing that shocked me is that when I had young people on my farm, they had no idea where food came from. I had no idea where it came from. It was a shock. They have no idea about what's going on in rural Britain. I just thought, actually, we've really got a problem here. And when I was pontificating earlier on in this sort of podcast, about we want to have kids going to be linked with farms and getting them more engaged in farming, just think it's essential. This is one of the reasons why. And what I want with this particular scheme we're starting in March is we're going to have 20 kids from non-traditional farming backgrounds get that taste the weekend. If they like it, then they could go and go to any of the agricultural colleges. And I would like this to be done by every agricultural college in the country.
Yeah.
One of the reasons
that's the ambition. Okay.
Yeah. One of the reasons I was keen to become a governor of science.
Yeah, of the RAE. Yeah.
Is because, the reality is this, the RAU's reputation is that's where all the posh people sent their kids to learn about farming. You're from a big family estate and, go and learn a bit of farming. And it's a bit like the Oxbridge of the farming industry. And that's not sustainable in the future. What we need to do is that we need to get people from different backgrounds. We need a lot more diversity. The conversations that we've just had is that land distribution, right to land, all of that is going to change, and that the farmers who are progressive and embracing that are the ones who are going to get the edge. Because I know, for example, with the retailers, the supermarkets, they have now sort of realized they need to do a lot more in getting diversity within the food chain. And, one of the things I'm advocating, as well as these big institutions renting and leasing land to people from non-traditional farming backgrounds, the retailers will also give these guys contracts.
Okay. Yep.
It's no good having land if you don't then have a route to market. But I'm having conversations with like Tesco's and Co-op and Morrison's around this very, very subject about what could they be doing to also be encouraging new entrants. So things are changing.
Yeah.
And I think that those farmers who could see they are really going to be getting some advantages of the new world.
Going back to your sort of idea of being bold and audacious, I'm interested in your view on time as well, because some people say that change takes a very long time. Change is gradual. Is change for you gradual, or can change happen overnight?
If you look what's happening in the world at the moment, okay, where there was something that suddenly sparked, it's what they call the tipping point. There comes a tipping point where that change is going to happen, but it's a build. It builds. And so what you don't want to do is that you don't want to get into a position of where things are forced upon you, where there's revolution. And what you want to be doing is that you want to be seen to be, again, ahead of the curve, evolving. Because the things that I'm talking about is that either we as an industry are going to be already doing things that will bring about this change, or it will be forced upon us. And we've already experienced what it's like when things are forced upon us. When that the fox hunting was the last real big thing. And I don't want, I don't think landowners want to find themselves in a position where it's forced upon them, dictated that they need to start doing this because actually it's starting to see as unreasonable and unfair. We landowners, big institutions need to be getting together to be actually leading the charge in making these changes. I know the rural community, and I understand the way the world works. I could see there's a lot of things that need to change. So if, for example, you are an urbanite and you want to, let's say, I don't know, rent a cottage or rent somewhere in a fantastic rural setting, the chances of you getting hold, even I'll give you an example. I've been trying to find a nice cottage, let's say, to rent because my business is round there.
Okay.
But actually, it's impossible. And it's impossible because the people who then get the opportunities are somehow connected.
Right.
They have the sort of connections that if you're outside of those connections, it's impossible.
Yeah.
And there is no accountability. Do you see what I mean? So that's part of the problem, is that it's become a bit of a club. And then if you're outside of that club, you cannot get the opportunity.
You're never going to get in.
And so unless these people do something about that, it's going to cause resentment, and then things will then start to be stipulated. And it's urban Britain where the power is. And what we do not want happening, for example, the right to roam and all that sort of stuff, these are the sort of stuff I could see coming around the corner if we're not actually saying we need to be demonstrating to urban Britain we're on their side. And actually it's not somehow we have to protect ourselves from them. And I just think part of rural thinking is that, we need to do a lot more outreach to make sure that they're there fighting our corner. Mm. And, the civil rights movement in America didn't come about because of just the actions of Black people. It also need white liberals to help bring about the change. It's exactly the same here with rural Britain. We need to have urban Britain on our side to always to bring around the changes.
Yeah. Oh, Wilfred, I wish I had you for 2 hours. We're going to have to start rounding this up. We always finish the show with the same 2 questions, which I'm going to ask you now. First is, I'll be interested in what this one is for you. If you have a message for the public, any message, what would it be?
If I had a message for the public, is that it's an interesting time that we're living in at the moment, and wherever you turn is bad news. Whether that is the war in Ukraine, whether it's a cost of living crisis, it just seems bad. And one of the benefits of being old, i.e. I'm coming up to my 65th year, is that I've been through all of this before. And so when I look at people with such alarm at the moment, mm-hmm. and they feel that the world is going to fall apart, I'd like to tell them, look, we go around the same loop over and over and over again, that actually it isn't as bleak as it appears, that there will be a way through this. The things that we are now being told is going to be the end, it isn't going to be so. That it may not go in the direction that you want, but things change. One of the things I have is great faith in humanity. We overcome. There is something phenomenal about us as a race of peoples. We will find a way. And part of being able to cope with all this madness around us is to have faith that although you don't know the answers and you don't know what the future is going to be, everything will be okay. Everything will be all right. My faith in saying is that it gets lighter after midnight. It doesn't stay dark forever. That's when the light starts coming after midnight.
That. And a message for farmers.
A message for farmers is that we need to embrace change. And that actually, if we're able to embrace change, we could become as important to the country as other industries. And that's what I would just say, embrace change.
Brilliant. That's a great message to end on. And finally, I'm doing this with all guests now, just an opportunity to promote a farming related podcast, blog or social media account or business, and maybe perhaps one of your incubator businesses.
I'm proud to promote them. I want to promote my own business. Tell your listeners.
Well, do that. That's what I was going to do next, actually. But
no, so yes, I'm always in. We have an online business, and we have. We send products out throughout the whole country, and we have a massive range, because what I want to do with the Black Farmer brand is it's more than just food products. It's a lifestyle. Yeah. And my next big venture, in fact, is finding a location for. In fact, you might have, if even your farmers listening to this podcast,
say anyone in the network
that actually has land with some buildings near a main road. I'm looking for somewhere that will become the Black Farmer Experience, which is a destination that will have farm shop, restaurant, wedding venue, conference center, and it's a place. It's a bridge for urban and rural Britain. And it'd be like the Black Farmer Experience. That's my next big venture. So that's the last big dream that I have. So I want to do with this venue what Rick Stein did with Padstow, where it becomes a mecca for people to feel that it's a place that's inclusive and they would feel sort of comfortable. So that's what I'm looking for. So that's my ad. Bugger advertising anybody else.
Great. Well, there you are, listeners. If anyone can help Wilfred, please do get in touch. We will leave it there. But Wilfred, thank you. Like I said, I wish we had more time because I love hearing from you, and I'm sure there's lots for listeners to think about to inspire them from that. You can find out more about the Black Farmer by visiting theblackfarmer.com or the Black Farmer on Twitter or Instagram. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform you're using. Share it on social media. Tag us at MTF_podcast. Please do continue to spread the word. Really appreciate that. A quick mention of what's happening this week over on our sister podcast, Rural Business Focus. I'll be joined by PR consultant Megan Allen. Megan is also the editor of the Rural Travel Guide, and we're talking about the power of storytelling. A lot to actually take from today's episode on this one, but also power of storytelling in generating brand awareness. That's out tomorrow. You can find that wherever you listen to this podcast. Next week on Meet the Farmers, we'll be in Warwickshire. Talking mainly sheep, social media, and the London Marathon as well with Bizza Walters. I hope you can join me then. I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers. Thank you very much for listening and have a great week.